BionicDance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Well, maybe atheists just do want to sin.
Maybe, maybe not. But first you have to prove that sin even exists, and be able to show us the source of that judgment. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. Today we're having a wee chat with a guy calling himself Christian Response, whose premise seems to be, well, let's let him tell it.
Let's say, just for argument's sake, that we the Christians are correct. Now, if you're an atheist, just think about this for a second. Let's say, for argument's sake, that we the Christian are correct, that there is a God, and that He has made His presence known, and that on some level you just don't want to accept that truth.
Now, why ever would we not want to accept the truth? Maybe not all of us, but the majority of the outspoken atheists tend to be critical thinkers who value evidence over all else when it comes to deciding whether something is real. If the evidence for your God is provable in a logical, consistent, evidence-based way, most of us would have no choice, no honest choice, but to believe in a God's existence, yours or anybody else's. That doesn't mean we'd become followers. If there is anything we might not accept, it's how that God, specifically the Abrahamic God, is alleged to treat people, what he, she, it, or they expects of us. I, for one, would be looking for the magic ring or flaming sword that could kill the fucker. Because, to be honest, the books I've read about most gods, they're not really very nice people. If humans pulled half the crap the gods do, we'd have strung them up by their own entrails long ago.
There would have to be some reason or some agenda or some hidden reason why you would be rejecting God if God were in fact real.
I've given you one reason, God's a bit of a dick, but other reasons are pretty simple. If everything else is equal except that God is real, He's done a damn good job of concealing that fact. There are a lot of things I don't believe in that might be real. I just don't have sufficient data to honestly form the conclusion that those things are real and still maintain my own personal sense of integrity. You should appreciate that. Apparently lying is one of the things we're not supposed to do according to your God. And if I said He's real when I haven't got enough evidence to say so, I'd be, well, sinning, wouldn't I?
Now, from my point of view, God is real. God is real and He makes Himself known if you want Him to make Himself known. So the reason why you don't know that He's real is that there is something in your heart, there is something in you that wants to reject God, that wants to pretend that it isn't true, even to yourself.
And from my point of view, God is a fairy tale that's been taken way too seriously, and your insistence that He's real is nothing more than some weapons-grade wishful thinking. So where does that leave us? And whenever someone says that God will reveal Himself, but only if we want Him to, just reinforces this conclusion. If God is real, I should be able to see Him, want to or not. If finding God requires wanting to, it sounds a lot like self-delusion, like seeing Jesus on toast. Believing in anything, deity or otherwise, should not require that kind of faith, and I've sworn to never use faith as a method for gathering data and forming conclusions. I am an apistivist, one who rejects faith in favor of facts. I've never been given a reason why God requires faith, not a good reason. Nobody has ever explained why it's such a burden for this all-loving and all-powerful creature to pop into our world once in a while, say hi, heal an amputee or two, and then bugger off. If He really loved us, really didn't want us to go to hell, and has the power to prevent it, then He'd do something like that to get us to believe in Him, instead of insisting we all go on faith. Really, which is more likely, that there's a magical, invisible, all-powerful being whose presence and interference in our universe is largely indistinguishable from if such a being didn't exist, or that people with very little knowledge of the universe and its workings told themselves a very comforting lie a few thousand years ago, and humanity still hasn't shaken free of it yet? Which seems more reasonable?
Let's say you're a young person, you're 23 years old, you drink, you smoke weed, you watch porn. You may even be tempted to believe in God or go to church or something, but there's something in you that knows, or at least suspects, that if you start pursuing, if you start looking into Christianity, you start trying to pursue God, you're going to have to give up some of the things.
Which suggests that only believers are able to sin. The rules you've got come from your holy text, and they only carry any weight at all if that text is true. Otherwise, they're just human opinions, and the idea that they're both given and enforced by a God is a delusion, if not an outright lie. And that text you carry is not the evidence that God is real. Your Bible is the claim that needs to be proved before it can be lent a scrap of validity, a feat nobody has ever achieved to the satisfaction of any critical thinker, any apistivist. And very many of the alleged sins are things that harm nobody, certainly nobody who hasn't consented to it. If you, or quote-unquote your God, has decided that drinking is wrong, great, don't drink. But as long as the alky who can't hold his liquor isn't hurting anybody but himself, let him. It's none of your business. If two people of the same sex want to bump uglies, perhaps even set up a life together, let them. It's none of your business. But no, you can't do that, can you? Your God has decreed such things as sin. And isn't it interesting that what so many humans find icky is also what their God thinks is a hell-worthy trespass? And thus, because you are commanded so, you must now persecute those you believe your God has found disappointing. But as far as these alleged sinners are concerned, they're doing nothing wrong. There's no reason for you to mess in their lives, and yet you do, which kind of makes you the villains here. But if you don't believe in a God, and you're right, then how can you possibly sin? You might commit a crime or make someone angry at you, but sin? Only believers will believe they've sinned, because only believers think sin exists. You can go ahead and believe in your commandments. The rest of us will make our own rules and call them laws. Perhaps someday we can meet in the middle, but until then, keep your religious rules to yourselves, because you're the only ones they apply to.
I know atheists don't think that you are consciously rejecting God. I know you think that God doesn't exist. But if God in fact does exist, which I am arguing that he does, that means you are on some level rejecting consciously.
But every last scrap of what you just said hinges on this one assertion.
If God in fact does exist, which I am arguing that he does.
So it seems that your first task must be proving God is real in a way that does not require faith, because unless you can do that, then everything else you have to say boils down to nothing more than you saying so.
And there is a reason for that. Some agenda, something that you are gaining psychologically, or at least so you think, that's making you do that. Wanting to sin would be a perfectly logical thing. Because you think if you become a Christian or if you start pursuing God, you're going to have to stop doing some of the things that you may like. It actually makes sense.
Maybe, maybe not. But let's break this down again. There are certain things we like to do, many of which can harm only those who've consented and actively participated in them, and which usually actually harm nobody at all, at least not by the standards of those taking part. And you're saying that we've decided to reject God in favor of being allowed to continue doing these harmless things for which there can be no reasonable objection. Further, the fact that your proof of the existence of this celestial authority consists of a book that has been edited, re-edited, translated, failed more than 1,000 fact checks, and seemed to stop producing miracles and making predictions at just about the time science came up with some decent recording gear. Well, you'll have to forgive me, but I think the agenda to make us reject God comes from your own side. It's no wonder you value faith so highly. You're going to need to believe without evidence if you're going to believe at all. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is your friendly neighborhood apistivist, BionicDance, saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think.